Well, I think my area is quite relevant for the area for English language teaching in both the second language context and a foreign language context. I think in the area of inclusive practices and accommodating language learners, I think this is very relevant in many countries where English is the dominant language, and having students feel that their languages that they bring to the table are valuable and should be continued while they're acquiring English. But also in the foreign language context, with the rise of CLEAL programs, content language integrated learning, where students are studying subject areas in English as a foreign language, I think the idea of teachers understanding about language awareness, but also the kinds of strategies that are useful for students in any kind of classroom where they're working with content and developing their language at the same time. I think that's very relevant to today. Well, my presentation dealt a lot with the kinds of strategies that all teachers need to be aware of, whether they're working with English language learners, specifically in teaching English, or whether they're teachers of content areas where English is a dominant language or where it's a foreign language. I talked a lot about the importance of having an awareness of how language is processed and acquired, but also about the kinds of strategies that we found to be very useful for students in all of these contexts. And ultimately, what most teachers say is that they don't disagree with the strategies, but ultimately it's the time. They feel that they need more time to collaborate with each other. We believe a lot in the idea of instructional coaching, where teachers learn from each other. No one's higher than the other teacher. They learn collaboratively. They observe each other's classes. They plan together. They try out different strategies and observe and learn from each other. And ultimately, I think most teachers believe that there's so much that can be gained. However, it's the time. Our institution's giving them enough time to sit and plan together and try out things so that they can bring better results for everyone. There are many tips I'd like to offer here, and I think anyone who's involved or interacting with the field of language education, I feel it's very important, regardless of what knowledge of languages that you have, that you really try to revisit the process that you went through to acquire another language. If you're an English language speaker who hasn't had a chance to develop the skills in a different language, I think it's important for you yourself to go through that process. I find it's very interesting when I do a sample lesson in a foreign language with a group of teachers in training, and not just in the language. Sometimes I take a subject area and deliver it in a foreign language just so that they can experience what their students might experience, what kind of processes that they go through, what kind of strategies help them, or for them to also reflect themselves on what they did as a learner. I think that's some of the most powerful moments in teacher training, is when you can put yourself in the learner's shoes. So as far as what tips, I would say be open. First of all, on a very generic level, be open to different possibilities. Also revisit how you learned and how you think you learn best, and think about, is your way the way for all students? Do you offer them enough choices? So I always tell teachers also, if they're going to do a task, be careful that the task isn't along the same repetitive line. Make sure you could think about, is there a way that you can have choices for the task so that you're targeting the different kinds of learning styles of your students? So variety and trying to put yourself in their position to understand the process better. I talked a lot about inclusive practices. So we talked a lot about strategies in our talk today, and it was great. But I also talked about the idea of inclusiveness and looking at intercultural understanding, making sure that students feel that they're included within the curriculum, within the classroom, within the heart of the school. And by inclusiveness, it means many things. We've certainly tried to look at inclusiveness on the diversity of languages that might be spoken within the student population, the different cultures that are present at different faiths. But inclusiveness means many things. It's your gender, it's your sexuality, it's your abilities, it's everything. So I would always recommend that teachers revisit how inclusive their teaching is, but also how inclusive is the school. And in the area of inclusiveness, I think there's wonderful work that's been done, and I'm going to mention two Canadians in particular here. One is Jim Cummins, who's talked a lot about the importance of first language for learners and how you cultivate that. not only for their good learning, but also for them to feel included within the school curriculum and environment. But there's also someone else who's done great work. Her name is Elizabeth Coelho. She has things called inclusiveness checklists, which I find were very useful in me working with staff at different schools in order to look at how inclusive the school is in representing the diversity of their learners. And sure enough, no matter what our efforts or good intentions are, often we're not being as inclusive as we would like. So Elizabeth Coelho, Jim Cummins are two names I'd like to put out there for their work in this area in order for you to take a look at your teaching and the school environment and how we're representing all the diversity that exists in our schools. It's hard to know what challenges will be presented. Of course, there are many things that go on around the world that might impact the learner in some way and affect them when they're coming to the classroom to learn. So I think for us to be aware of what their own personal individual challenges are is going to help us reach them better. I know that in this profession, we never know exactly what might be going on in a student's mind. There could be something that's really troubling them, that's going to pose a challenge. It's going to close up their affective filter, and it's going to make it very hard to acquire a new language if there's something that they're struggling with on different levels. However, I think the other challenges we have to look at is the power that English has worldwide. I think it's important for us to understand that many people want to learn English as an additional language. It's a wonderful thing. It keeps us all involved in this amazing profession. But I think it's also important for us to understand that the way of the world today is multilingualism. And I think I would promote to English speakers that we have to be one of the first groups of people to really approach this multilingual vision that many people are looking at around the world. And embracing all the languages that are out there, because oftentimes English language speakers are not as engaged in additional languages, because we know that most people around the world are learning English as the priority additional language. So I would say the challenges for us as educators is to really be aware of this multilingual vision, to look at the fact that in many countries people are moving beyond just 2 languages and they're really promoting 3 or more. In order to be able to understand others on an intercultural level, but also on a linguistic level. So I think this is what I would say is what we need to be aware of for the future, so that we can really also demonstrate to our students that the learning of languages is very important and is crucial for our ultimate intercultural understanding together.